Hi, I tell very exciting and horrifying stories to everyone. I suggest you subscribe because I post such stories every day. Story 1. The Hollow Bride. The Curse of Elderwood Village. Nestled deep within an ancient forest stood Elderwood Village, a small, self-sufficient community untouched by the modern world. The villagers lived by a set of strict traditions, passed down through countless generations, centered on appeasing the forest's guardian spirit, an entity they called the Hollow Bride. Every year, on the first full moon of spring, the village held the Festival of Vows. A chosen maiden would don a white dress, walk into the woods alone, and never return. To outsiders, the story was nothing more than a disturbing legend, a relic of a forgotten age. But to the villagers, the ritual was deadly serious. It was said that the Hollow Bride once was a woman betrayed on her wedding day, murdered by her betrothed in a jealous rage. Her spirit lingered, vowing revenge not just on him, but on all who would take love for granted. To ensure the forest's safety and fertility, the village offered her a bride each year, a willing sacrifice to keep her wrath at bay. Eleanor, a traveler with an insatiable curiosity for folklore, arrived in Elderwood just days before the festival. She was a folklorist, eager to document the strange traditions of remote communities. At first, the villagers avoided her questions, their faces darkening at the mention of the Hollow Bride. But when they realized she wasn't leaving, the elders gave her a stern warning. The forest is not for strangers. You'll anger the bride if you interfere. Undeterred, Eleanor set her sights on uncovering the truth. The Chosen. Eleanor learned that this year's chosen bride was a girl named Anwen, barely 18 and trembling with fear. The villagers celebrated her selection as an honor, but it was clear she felt no such pride. Eleanor approached her discreetly, hoping to hear the young woman's perspective. "They say it's for the good of the village," Anwen whispered, her eyes welling with tears. "That my sacrifice will protect everyone. But I don't want to die." Eleanor's resolve hardened. She couldn't stand by and watch an innocent girl walk to her death. Determined to stop the ritual, she spent the next few days gathering what scraps of information she could about the Hollow Bride. She learned of the spirit's tragic past, how her betrothed had lured her to the forest under the guise of a romantic elopement, only to plunge a dagger into her chest and bury her beneath an ancient oak. Her fury had warped the forest, turning it into a labyrinth of shadows and whispers. Those who entered without her blessing rarely emerged, and those who mocked her plight were said to meet gruesome ends. The forest beckons. The night of the festival arrived. The villagers gathered in the central square, their faces masked with solemnity. Anwen, dressed in a flowing white gown, was led to the edge of the forest by the elders. Eleanor followed at a distance, her pulse racing. She couldn't let this happen. When Anwen hesitated, her escorts grabbed her by the arms, pushing her toward the dark tree-line. The crowd chanted prayers in a language Eleanor didn't recognize, their voices blending with the rising wind. As Anwen disappeared into the shadows, Eleanor seized her chance. She slipped away from the crowd and followed the girl into the woods. The air grew colder with each step, the trees twisting unnaturally as though leaning closer to listen. Eleanor called out softly, "Anwen, where are you?" Her voice echoed strangely, distorted by the oppressive silence. She stumbled upon the young woman huddled by a tree, sobbing. Before Eleanor could comfort her, a bone-chilling wail pierced the air. The shadows thickened, coalescing into the form of a woman. Her gown was tattered, her face obscured by a veil, and her hollow eyes glowed faintly. The hollow bride had come, the wrath of the bride. The spirit's voice was a cacophony of despair and rage. "You dare to enter my domain unbidden?" she hissed, her translucent figure flickering like a dying flame. Her presence radiated an overwhelming sense of sorrow, as if the forest itself mourned with her. "I know your pain," Eleanor said, stepping forward despite the icy fear gripping her heart. "I know what he did to you, but this girl is innocent. She doesn't deserve to die." The hollow bride tilted her head, studying Eleanor. "You think to plead her case? You carry no love in your heart? What could you possibly know of betrayal?" Eleanor hesitated, the spirit's words cutting deeper than she expected. Memories of her own failed relationships surfaced, of the loneliness that had driven her to immerse herself in folklore instead of people. But she forced herself to stand firm. "I know enough to see that this cycle of pain will never end unless someone stops it." The bride's hollow eyes darkened. "You speak of ending my pain, yet you offer no justice for what was taken from me." "I'll find it," Eleanor promised. "I'll find the man who wronged you, or whatever remains of him, and make him answer for his crime." For a moment, the forest stilled. Then the bride's voice softened, almost a whisper. "If you fail, you will take her place." A truth unearthed. The bride vanished, leaving Eleanor and Anwen alone in the oppressive silence. The young woman clung to Eleanor, sobbing with relief. But Eleanor's mind was already racing. The elders had spoken of the bride as if she were an eternal force, yet Eleanor knew spirits were bound by unfinished business. If she could find the remains of the man who betrayed her, perhaps she could set the spirit free. Eleanor returned to the village, forcing the reluctant elders to reveal what they knew. Under pressure, they admitted that the murderer's descendants still lived among them, their family cursed to live in constant fear of the bride's wrath. The bloodline had dwindled over the years, but one man remained, the village blacksmith, a grizzled recluse named Idris. Eleanor confronted Idris, demanding the truth. He revealed that he was the great-great-grandson of the original killer, a secret his family had carried in shame. "I've seen her," he confessed, his voice trembling. "She comes to me in my dreams, her face a mask of sorrow. I know she waits for my death." The final bargain. With Idris in tow, Eleanor returned to the forest, calling out to the bride. The spirit materialized, her mournful gaze fixed on Idris. "Your blood carries the stain of betrayal," she said. "You cannot escape it." Idris fell to his knees, weeping. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I can't undo what he did, but if my life will bring you peace, take it." The bride hesitated, her form flickering. For the first time, her voice wavered. "Your death will not undo what was taken, but your penance is accepted." She reached out, her translucent hand passing through Idris's chest. He collapsed, lifeless, and the forest seemed to exhale. The oppressive shadows lifted, and the bride turned to Eleanor one last time. "You kept your promise," she said, her hollow eyes softening. "The cycle is broken." With that, she dissolved into the mist, leaving only silence. Aftermath. Elderwood Village would never be the same. The Festival of Vows was abandoned, and the forest began to regrow, free of its curse. Eleanor left with a heavy heart, forever changed by her encounter with the Hollow Bride. She continued her work, but the memory of the spirit's sorrow and the weight of her promise stayed with her. And on quiet nights, when the wind whispered through the trees, she swore she could still hear the faint echo of a bride's lament, carried by the forest she had saved. Story 2. The Whispers of Blackthorn Grove. The legend of the Whispering Woods. In a quiet corner of the Scottish Highlands, there lay Blackthorn Grove, a dense thicket shrouded in perpetual fog. The grove was known for its eerie stillness and a peculiar phenomenon that had haunted the region for centuries. Whispers carried by the wind, faint yet unmistakable, calling out names of those who ventured too close. The villagers spoke of a grim legend. Long ago, during the famine years, a woman named Moira Dunraven was accused of witchcraft. The townsfolk claimed she had cursed the land to rot their crops, though in truth, she had done little more than tend to her herb garden. One desperate night, they dragged her into the grove and burned her at the stake, her cries drowned out by their chants. Before she died, Moira uttered a terrible curse. "The forest shall be my voice. It will remember my pain. Those who listen will join me." From that day, the grove became a place of dread. Those who heard the whispers were never seen again, their voices joining the forest's eternal lament. A scholar's curiosity. Margaret Greaves, a folklorist and author, arrived in the nearby village of Darnack with the intent of unraveling the mystery of Blackthorn Grove. For years, she had collected stories of haunted woods and curses, but none intrigued her as much as this one. The whispers, the disappearances, the legend of Moira, all seemed too vivid, too persistent, to be dismissed as mere superstition. When Margaret inquired about the grove, the villagers were quick to warn her away. "No good comes from listening to the voices," said Angus, the innkeeper. "They call to you by name, and once they do, you're lost." Despite their warnings, Margaret pressed on. She pored over old records and diaries, piecing together the fragments of Moira's story. The more she learned, the more she felt an inexplicable pull toward the grove. There was something unfinished about the tale, as though Moira's curse had left a wound that refused to heal. One chilly morning, armed with her notebook and a tape recorder, Margaret set out for Blackthorn Grove. The first whispers. The grove was darker than she expected, the canopy of blackthorn trees weaving a nearly impenetrable ceiling. The air smelled of damp earth and decay, and the ground was littered with gnarled roots that seemed to writhe beneath her feet. As she ventured deeper, the whispers began. At first, they were faint, like the rustling of leaves in a gentle breeze. But soon, the voices grew clearer, each one distinct. They murmured in soft, melodic tones, though Margaret couldn't make out the words. She turned on her recorder, her pulse quickening. "Who are you?" she called, her voice steady despite the chill creeping up her spine. The whispers stilled, replaced by a deafening silence. Then one voice broke through, a woman's voice, low and mournful. "You shouldn't have come." Margaret froze. "Moira," she asked, her throat dry. The voice didn't answer, but the whispers resumed, louder now, and unmistakably calling her name. "Margaret! Margaret!" The forgotten clearing. Margaret pressed on, her heart pounding. The whispers surrounded her, growing more insistent, as though the forest itself were alive. At last, she stumbled into a clearing dominated by a single, ancient blackthorn tree. Its gnarled branches twisted skyward, and at its base was a pile of scorched stones, Moira's pyre. As Margaret approached, the air grew colder, and a shape began to materialize. It was a woman, translucent and wreathed in smoke, her eyes burning with sorrow and fury. Mora Dunraven had appeared. "You seek my story," the spirit said, her voice a blend of accusation and despair. "Why?" "I want to understand," Margaret replied. "What happened to you, and why the forest whispers?" Mora's expression softened. "You wish to understand? Then you must bear witness." The curse's origins. The grove around Margaret shifted, the trees fading into shadows as a scene unfolded before her eyes. She saw Moira as she had been in life, a kind-hearted herbalist tending to her garden. Then came the famine, the accusations, and the mob. Margaret watched in horror as the villagers dragged Moira to the clearing, binding her to the blackthorn tree. "They took everything from me," Moira said, her spectral form beside Margaret. "And when the flames consumed my body, they silenced my screams with their chants. But my voice was stronger than their hate. I cursed this land to remember." The vision shifted again, showing generations of villagers who had entered the grove and never returned. Margaret saw their faces, pale and gaunt, their mouths whispering ceaselessly. "They listen," Morris said, "and now they are mine, the forest's hunger." Margaret realized the truth. The whispers were not just echoes of Moira's pain. They were the voices of her victims, trapped in the grove, bound to her curse. And now they wanted Margaret to join them. The whispers rose to a deafening crescendo, the voices calling her name over and over. Margaret clamped her hands over her ears, but it was no use. She turned to flee, but the forest shifted around her, the trees twisting into an impenetrable maze. "You wanted to understand," Morris said, her voice echoing from every direction. "Now you will." The whispers grew closer, their tones pleading and desperate. Margaret's legs gave way, and she collapsed to the ground, the forest closing in around her. She felt the voices seep into her mind, her thoughts fragmenting. For a moment, she saw the world through Moira's eyes, the betrayal, the fire, the endless sorrow, a bargain with the dead. Through sheer willpower, Margaret forced herself to stand. "Your pain is justified," she said, her voice trembling. "But these people, those who followed, they didn't hurt you. Let them go." Moira's ghost appeared before her, flickering like a candle flame. "Do you offer to take their place?" Margaret hesitated. The whispers clawed at her mind, but she nodded. "Yes." The forest fell silent. Moira's hollow eyes bore into Margaret's, and for a moment it seemed the curse might end. But the spirit shook her head. "You carry no guilt. The forest will not take you." The ground beneath Margaret's feet split open, revealing an abyss filled with countless faces, those who had been claimed by the grove. Moira reached out, her expression one of both sorrow and resignation. "Leave this place," she said, "and carry my story. Let them know what hatred does." The price of truth. Margaret awoke at the edge of the grove, her recorder still in her hand. When she played back the tape, the whispers were faint but audible, along with Moira's final words. "Do not let them forget." She returned to the village, shaken but determined. The whispers of Blackthorn Grove remained, but Margaret knew she had been spared for a reason. She published her account of the grove's legend, ensuring Moira's story would live on. Yet even as she wrote, Margaret couldn't escape the faint sound of her name carried on the wind. The forest had let her go, but its whispers would haunt her forever. Story 3. The Shadow of the Lantern Bearer. The village of Lantern Hollow. Hidden in a remote valley, The village of Lantern Hollow was known for its peculiar tradition. Every autumn, as the nights grew longer, the villagers would light hand-carved lanterns and leave them outside their homes. The lanterns, shaped like grinning faces, were said to keep away the lantern bearer, a ghostly figure who wandered the hills with his own twisted lantern, searching for lost souls. The legend dated back to the 17th century, when a woodsman named Elias Gorin went missing during a fierce storm. His body was never found, but his lantern was discovered deep in the forest, its glass blackened as if scorched. Soon after, villagers began to see a figure wandering the woods at night, a dim light swinging in his hand. Those who followed it were never seen again, and their cries for help were said to echo through the valley. Evelyn Porter, a journalist and skeptic, arrived in Lantern Hollow determined to debunk the myth. The story of the lantern bearer was perfect fodder for her next expose on superstitions and small-town folklore. Armed with her camera and recorder, she planned to spend the week documenting the village's strange practices. But Lantern Hollow was not like other places Evelyn had visited. From the moment she arrived, the air felt heavier, the shadows darker. The villagers were tight-lipped, their faces pale with a quiet, shared fear. They warned her to stay indoors after sunset, but Evelyn dismissed their concerns as small-town paranoia. The lantern light. Evelyn spent her first day exploring the village, interviewing locals and photographing the rows of lanterns lining the streets. She noticed that many homes had locks on their windows and heavy shutters, though the weather was mild. When she pressed the innkeeper, Mrs. Thorne, for details, the woman simply shook her head. "You think we're fools," she said, her voice trembling. "You'll see the lantern light soon enough. And when you do, you'll wish you'd listened." That night, as Evelyn reviewed her notes, she noticed something strange. The lantern outside her room flickered erratically, though there was no wind. Curious, she stepped outside to investigate. The village was eerily quiet, the only sound the soft creak of swinging lanterns. Suddenly, she saw it, a faint, pale light moving through the woods on the outskirts of the village. It swayed gently, as if carried by an invisible hand. Evelyn's pulse quickened. This was it, the so-called lantern bearer. Grabbing her camera, she followed the light. The first encounter. The light led her into the forest, its glow faint but constant. Evelyn stumbled over roots and underbrush, the trees closing in around her. She called out, expecting to find a villager playing a prank, but there was no response. The light remained ahead, always just out of reach. After what felt like hours, she reached a clearing. In the center stood a figure cloaked in shadow, holding a lantern unlike any she had seen before. Its glass was jagged and blackened, the flame inside flickering erratically. The figure's face was hidden beneath a hood, but Evelyn felt its gaze pierce through her. "You shouldn't be here," it said, its voice hollow and distant, like the echo of a scream. Evelyn froze. Her camera slipped from her hands, landing with a dull thud. "Who are you?" she managed to whisper. The figure tilted its head. "You followed my light. Now you are mine." The lantern's glow intensified, and Evelyn felt an icy grip on her chest. She stumbled backward, gasping for air, and the figure vanished. The forest fell silent, save for the sound of her own ragged breathing. The curse revealed. Evelyn returned to the village, shaken but determined to uncover the truth. She confronted Mrs. Thorne the next morning, demanding answers. The innkeeper sighed, as if burdened by a secret too heavy to carry. The lantern bearer is not just a ghost, Mrs. Thorne explained. He is a collector of souls, bound by a curse. When Elias Gorin died, he made a pact with something dark, a spirit of the forest. It promised to guide him home, but it deceived him. Now, he wanders eternally, luring others into the woods to share his fate. Evelyn was skeptical, but the memory of the shadowy figure lingered in her mind. She decided to investigate further, poring over old records in the village archive. There, she found accounts of the missing, children, travelers, even entire families, who had vanished over the centuries, their last known location always near the forest. One account, written by a survivor, chilled her to the bone. I saw the lantern light, and I followed. I heard the voice of my son calling to me, though he had been dead for years. The bearer showed me his face, and I knew I would never escape. The lantern's glow. The following night, Evelyn resolved to confront the lantern bearer again. She left the safety of the inn and walked into the woods, carrying her own lantern to light the way. This time, the pale light appeared almost immediately, weaving through the trees like a will-o'-the-wisp. As she followed, the whispers began. At first, they were faint, indistinct murmurs carried by the wind. But soon, they grew louder, more insistent, taking on the voices of people she knew. Her mother, her childhood friend, even her late brother. Come closer, they urged. We're waiting for you. Evelyn hesitated, fear gnawing at her resolve. But she pressed on, determined to uncover the truth. At last, she reached another clearing, where the lantern bearer awaited her. This time, the figure lowered its hood, revealing a face twisted with sorrow and decay. Its eyes burned with an unnatural light. "Why do you seek me?" it asked, its voice reverberating through the trees. "To understand," Evelyn replied. "To break the curse." The bearer laughed, a hollow, chilling sound. "You cannot break what binds me. The forest has my soul, and now it will have yours." The escape. The bearer raised its lantern, and the forest erupted in a cacophony of voices, their screams merging into a deafening roar. Evelyn turned and ran, the light of the bearer's lantern chasing her through the trees. The whispers clawed at her mind, promising safety if she would only stop and turn back. As she neared the village, she stumbled over a root and fell hard. The lantern she carried shattered, plunging her into darkness. The bearer's light loomed closer, its glow illuminating the twisted branches around her. In a moment of desperation, Evelyn reached into her bag and hurled her camera at the bearer. The flash went off, a brilliant burst of light that momentarily blinded the figure. Evelyn scrambled to her feet and ran. The camera's memory card her only evidence. The aftermath. Evelyn left Lantern Hollow the next morning, shaken but alive. When she developed the photos, she found only one that wasn't blurred, a faint silhouette in the woods, holding a lantern with a blackened flame. She published her story, but few believed her. The villagers, however, knew better. They continued their tradition, lighting their lanterns each autumn to keep the bearer at bay. As for Evelyn, she never returned to Lantern Hollow. But on quiet nights, when the wind rustled through the trees, she swore she could see a faint light in the distance, swaying gently, waiting for her to follow.